Welcome to the Rollup TV. Welcome to Mammoth May. We are live in New York City. Today from the Big Apple, it's Thursday, May 15th, and Coinbase just got hacked. Klarna's got a lot going on. Market's rebounding. Welcome back to the Rollup TV. What's going on,
Live
Rob?
from New York.
That boy's in town.
It's Thursday night, live from New York. We're coming at you live. It is the Rollup TV. Andy and I are separated by only a few doors, not a few states as usual. It is an absolute banger of a time here in New York. Andy, we left Research Day a few hours ago where we were hearing about the new internet. It's super insightful. You can feel the energy. We're having a great time. We hosted the Rollup TV happy hour to celebrate the launch
Last
of the
night.
Rollup
That was
TV.
a banger.
Last night
probably 100 people came through to the office. We had drinks. We had music. We had a big spinning wheel. That was our first happy hour, first main event hosted in the city. More to come.
We had
That was
Jello
awesome.
shots sponsored by a great partner. Shout out to the Magic Newton team launching AI agents. They're doing a great job with the exciting new launch, and was a pleasure to co-host at their office. I think a lot of people are here for Research Day. A lot of people are here for Mammoth, New York City tomorrow. Shout out to the Mammoths in town. These are the biggest, most ambitious founders in the space, powered by Celestia underneath. And we are riding the Mammoth across the chasm to the real world.
We are. It is Mammoth May, and we are here. We're going to jump right in. The good stuff happens live. Welcome back to the best show on the frontier. We got three amazing guests today. We got Haseeb from Dragonfly. Got some really fun questions for him. We've got Gavin from Focus Tree, a sneaky application bringing hundreds of thousands of users on chain without them knowing it through their mindful application. And then we got Jan from OpenMind, a decentralized intelligence network out of San Francisco. So looking forward to that. We're going to jump right into the first topic of the day, which is Blackbird taking a bet on Celestia. So if you guys didn't see Celestia's recent announcement, there was a ton of awesome chains launching on Celestia. Blackbird is a big restaurant application that is crossing the chasm where mainstream adoption of crypto and Web3 through food makes sense. You know, you do loyalty programs, you do these types of reward programs. They're just announced their Flynet will be built on Celestia. And this is something this is a serial entrepreneur, which is taking a big bet on the Celestia ecosystem, as well as on this idea of Blackbird. And I was actually at an oyster bar with some friends. Actually, Cecilia was there, Rob. She was there at the party last night. And
friend of the show.
We were going out, and there was a Blackbird payment kiosk thing at the restaurant. And that was my first time seeing it in the city. And so cool to see that then tie into, of course, Celestia in Mammoth May here. So excited to see Blackbird taking a big bet there. And I think that they will be paid off in terms of their ideas for where to build their ambitious ideas.
Look, I think you put it out there. This is the idea of the Mammoth founder. The guys that think bigger, the girls that think bigger, those who dream bigger, the most ambitious projects in the space. To give everyone a little bit of background, maybe you've heard of Resy. Resy is an American online restaurant company to make reservations at these restaurants. It was founded by Ben Leventhal, I think I'm saying that right, who's also the founder of Blackbird. Also, Resy was founded by Gary Vee, big name in the space. And they've signed up 16,000 plus restaurants globally that you can book reservations through Resy. So obviously Ben has experience in this space. He's running the same playbook with Blackbird plus, right? And so that I think is the turning point. We're seeing traditional Web2 businesses and Web2 founders that have done this before and found product market fit now leverage better technology and software to add more value to the end consumer.
Yeah, and shout out to Conduit for having all four of these chains. Plume, our fund invested in Plume quite a bit ago. Really early investment pre-seed there. I think that's actually one of our first ever 100Xs. So shout out to Good Idea Ventures, which will be rebranded out soon. We did a small check in that one, but I think that'll be a really nice win. Also, Winner, a cool kind of gaming gambling platform. Obviously, Blackbird and the others there. So, I mean, look, Arbitrage from Orbit is absolutely pushing for best tech with the combination of Celestia. Blackbird's moving to it. These chains are on it. So excited to see that roll out and kind of see what's coming next for Blackbird and the Celestia ecosystem. So that's all I got for this one here. We got some really interesting Bitcoin institutional topics as well coming up next with our guys from Nakamoto. So I don't know if you saw the news, but Nakamoto has recently announced a massive Sailor-like fund for Bitcoin. And so this is kind of what I was getting at the other day, Rob, where I think that this Bitcoin cycle is going to be so driven by leverage more than anything that it's going to cause a much higher price target for Bitcoin. But the preceding bear market will be very, very aggressive. Like I thought maybe we would never see a negative 70% Bitcoin again after the top. But if these things start to blow up, right, then I think we could see something like that. That's my take, is that this is something that is going to accelerate the adoption of Bitcoin higher, quicker, and to a point that we may have thought was not possible in 2025, 2026. But I also think it's going to have ripple effects in the downfalls.
This is the impending supply shock that I think everyone feels, maybe sees coming. I mean, as we speak, Eric Trump, son of President Donald Trump, is on stage talking about the race to the top. He's in I believe it's Saudi Arabia, it's somewhere in the Middle East, and he's there with the Saudis talking about sovereign wealth funds purchasing crypto, specifically purchasing Bitcoin. And again, wow. I mean, look, El Salvador pioneered. When we're talking about mammoth founders, I think it's important to speak about President Bukele pioneering across the chasm and taking a nation state into the crypto world with his purchases of Bitcoin. This is not slowing down. There are 200 plus countries. There's multiple sovereign wealth funds. To think that we're near the top and it's time to start talking about what happens during the bear market, I think that is still, years to come. It remains to be seen. The point is that we have not even approached money printer season. These funds are entrenched into the institutional capital of the enterprise level types of plays. These plays are just becoming popular and common enough where more funds and institutions can start to perform these trades. Look, Saylor, Bukele, these guys were pioneers. They are mammoths in their own right. And I think they will only be setting the trend. So $458 million of Bitcoin, good. It's a race to the top. These guys are only going to want to accumulate more. Yep. Honestly, I do think it's in their best interest. This is going to perform massive buying pressure on Bitcoin. Yep. I think there's another separate conversation to be had here. Maybe we'll have it another time about what happens when there is a supply shock, when the common man isn't able to get its hands on Bitcoin anymore. What happens to mining? What happens to transaction fees if there is a limit and a chokehold on the Bitcoin supply? I mean, obviously price runs, but I think there are knock-on effects afterwards.
I mean, what's interesting here is that Nakamoto is actually ran by Trump's advisor, David Bailey. There's just going to be this institutional buying spree. I mean, Brian Armstrong said, every fund, every pension, every 401k, they will all be buying Bitcoin. This is the quiet revolution. So, look, I'm excited to see this play out. And I think that we'll see a lot more coming. So that's my takes there. I think you're right on. It's too early to be thinking about what happens in the later stages of the bull. But, at the end of the day, again, I thought that maybe this run would be a bit more around spot ETF buying and institutional buying rather than a bunch of basically billionaires and funds levering up on stocks and issuing debt to basically pump Bitcoin. So, that was a bit of a shock. Yeah. So.
Look, I think you're right. I think a lot of this does remain to be seen. Ultimately, we know this has a positive impact on the market. I do think something that we're in the thick of right now, and a lot of times the can gets kicked down the road when it comes to AI, when we're talking about job replacements and layoffs and AI taking these jobs. that is no longer some futuristic doomsday scenario.
Yeah, I mean, you heard what Nil said, right? On Tuesday, he said that he thinks within 5 to 10 years, people will spend more money on robotics or humanoids or whatever than they will on automobiles, which is absolutely crazy. So Klarna here has been making some headlines. Is Microsoft betting against humans? So Klarna fired a ton of their previous employees who were originally let go to use AI service chatbots. They were meant to improve customer service and human touch. Now, Klarna has recently rehired them, which is a big contrast with Microsoft's approach, who fired 3% of their workforce, almost 6,000 people, to invest in AI. Even 15-year employees. My uncle works at Microsoft, and even high-ranking ones were let go. What's your take here? What is it too early to think that AI can actually replace human function in the labor force?
I want to. So your uncle didn't get laid off, I presume.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I did not hear from him about it, so I assume not.
Okay. Well, that's good. At least in the
Yeah.
in the here and now.
I mean, he's been working there for like 30 years. So
Look, I mean, 6% of your workforce is not insignificant, right? And
3%, 3%.
Excuse me, 3%, still not insignificant, right? When you're talking
Right.
about the company of a Microsoft scale, I think it was 6,000 employees, right? 3% of their workforce. So that,
Yeah.
I mean, that's thousands of people that are losing their jobs. And you're right, they are director level employees. These are white collar jobs, and I think it's interesting to note why AI is going and replacing white collar jobs first. It's because we don't have the robots to replace blue collar jobs yet, but I think it will make its move down the line. Ultimately, there's a divergence here. And I think there's opportunities. When we get divergences, there's opportunities for arbitrage. So you see Klarna, look, they went through with this. They fired a significant part of their workforce, ended up hiring them back. Microsoft does not have the benefit of hindsight. Now they're at step one, where Klarna is now at step two, right? So Microsoft has now fired 6,000 employees. I think it's interesting to think about this in terms of probabilities. What is the probability that you would peg to Microsoft hiring back some portion of the employees that they fired, 3,000, 4,000? I think there's a non-zero percent. I want to say it's maybe upwards of 30, 40% after they realize that there are growing pains associated with laying off 6,000 employees. Do they bring those people back? I think there's a remote chance that they do.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think there's obviously a non-zero chance as well. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think this trend is only getting started, where there is going to be a consistent push towards effectively reducing the workforce, especially in the white collar realm. And this is particularly scary. What's unique is that I just don't think that content creators like us are going to be affected in terms of replacement by AI. Like, one thing I've seen is Raoul Powell, who has like a very cool like AI thing that he like switches for himself. That's cool. But I'm not sure that content and content creators are going to be affected. So next up, we have Galaxy's NASDAQ debut is on Friday. Wall Street is welcoming crypto money in the biggest way since, Coinbase had their IPO a couple of years back. They're in the SP 500 now. Galaxy has their debut on Friday. It's Wall Street's crypto moment. I mean, look, it's like, this is what's happening in the biggest crypto companies in the space. And mind you, Galaxy was on the absolute fence for Luna and Terra. They got fined $100 million by the SEC, and they paid that fine, or $200 million.
I'm laughing because I just pictured Novigratz's tattoo on his.
I know, the Terra
his
tattoo.
bicep of Terra Luna and the wolf crying to the moon. Absolutely on the fence is one way to put it.
So previously, Galaxy Interactive only was listed on Canadian exchanges, has tried to go on NASDAQ for a while, over 4 years. But now with Gensler gone, the path is so much clearer. Countdown to the listing. We got one more day. It's going live Friday. Look, I'm so glad Gensler's out. I'm glad that Novogratz survived Luna. I mean, they made a ton of money on that, like billions. And I'm glad that they're going to push crypto forward in doing this. I don't own any Galaxy. I've thought about it in the past. Again, I just own Coinbase in my stock account. But let's see what happens. And so, I mean, I think this thing will come out of the gate pretty strong. But again, I think they'll just trade like a Coinbase, like a Robinhood, almost like a MicroStrategy as well.
Look, I'm also on the fence. There's two ways to look at this. You could look at Galaxy and you could say, okay, these guys have a ton of assets under management. They've got the finger on the pulse of the crypto industry. Launch a token. That is a natural conclusion from a certain
instead of going an IPO, like launch a token.
Well, that's the other way to look at it, right? And so now with Gensler gone, you have a path to both. Previously, I think, suppose Gensler was still in for another 4 years and Galaxy wanted to go public in certain sense, they would be forced into the tokenization path. Now you're giving companies options. And I think we're going to, again, see experimentation. We're going to see companies go public. We're going to see companies launch tokens, and we're going to continue to find these experiments, right? And this is the beauty of experimentation with markets is you're going to have companies on both sides. You're going to see what works. And this is going to signal to all upcoming companies that say, look, we want to follow a playbook. We want to be in the most liquid, the most efficient markets. Now they have the benefit of hindsight and data in both paths. I think this is indicative of a general trend. I mean, we can talk about Mayor Adams putting his entire government salary into Bitcoin. And
he was early too. I mean, look, we're both in New York. They're trying to make this place the crypto capital.
Absolutely, right? So look, we've been going to events. We know the energy that is here. We see it. We're around it. So I think, again, Gensler's out. You're starting to see the blurred lines between the crypto companies that are launching tokens and the crypto companies that are going on public markets. I think ultimately these two industries, these two markets will become one. There will be some integration that happens. And what is this going to look like? Well, I think you're going to have companies that are listed publicly that could also launch a token. It'll just be another product offering. Maybe they have like a double dip format. Maybe they split the equity and cap table into tokenized equities and normal traded equities. Ultimately, I think you're going to see companies on both sides of the coin, and you're going to have things like CoinGecko that represent the indices of crypto, and you're going to have the S&P that represents the indices of the public markets. And the lines are going to start to blur. This is what crossing the chasm looks like in the real world in real time. It looks like no more chasm when there are just green fields across both ends. And I think we're going to see that in the markets. We're going to see companies that, again, have mammoth energy pioneer this journey into the real world, whether it starts from one end or the other. I think this is positive for both the public markets, it's positive for crypto, and I think it's positive for companies and entrepreneurship overall.
Look, I think NYC is going to overtake Miami, Dubai, Singapore as crypto hub. I think it already is doing so. I think so. New York has this thing called bit license. It's really annoying for regulations, and there's certain coins that can't be listed on different exchanges here. And they still need to figure that out. But I think I put out a tweet: NYC, London, Dubai, Singapore, Hong Kong, Miami, SF, maybe Vegas, maybe on there. A couple other small cities I think could fit there, and that's like the crypto hubs of the world. But obviously, we're here in New York City. We think, I think that this is a place worth investing time into. The tax situation in New York is just so annoying. I mean, you got to pay taxes on everything. Florida, where all of our businesses are domiciled in Florida, so much better from that perspective. So hard to see the, I don't know, is New York as good as another 10% off your, bottom line? I don't know. As an entrepreneur, it's hard to see these things.
Yeah, I hear that. Obviously, we're both from Florida. I do think that there's an energy in New York right now because it is a global hub. Ultimately, I think it is beneficial to come to New York. It's beneficial to come to these conferences and network so that you are plugged in to people that are going and spreading knowledge and information and companies across the world. I do think when it comes to living and lifestyle, we can get a lot from the comfort of our own homes and then go and make these sporadic moves outwards to these conferences, right? So I think, again, networking is extremely important. Tapping into network is one of the most valuable things that people can do as entrepreneurs. I think New York is a hub, just like a lot of those other places that you mentioned. I think ultimately we're going to see more and more localism. I think we're going to see local markets. We're going to see local currencies to a certain extent. And we're seeing a transition away from globalist policies. We see this. I think this is why Trump got elected. If you love him or hate him, we're moving away from this globally interconnected world, one that is just kind of like one massive globalist blob. And we're moving into one that is more local. And we're going to see this reflected in markets, companies, and currencies, and ultimately in networks overall. So I think New York is a hub. I think there's a few other hubs. And ultimately, if you're placed in or around one of these hubs, you're probably doing well. Also, feel free and do yourself a favor, take trips to these hubs pretty frequently.
Yep, I agree. I'm pretty keen to see how I'm going to plan the next 6 to 8 months here in New York. So, look, I was excited for this trip and for this entire time here, but there's a lot of other things. There's a lot of cool places in the world, a lot of interesting things happening. So, moving on to Believe, this coin, launch coin, has absolutely flown. Like, it's up 25x on the last 2 weeks. Basically, it's a funding mechanism called internet capital markets. It kind of feels like reskinning ICOs, this time with theoretically real businesses on chain. So coming in, we'll pull a tweet up here that kind of shows more about what's happening. I thought Chao Wang had a great take on this with regards to the product market fit of this entire thing, where the most obvious intersection between crypto and other non-finance fields is fundraising and tokenization. Things like DeSci got a ton of hate because of that level of kind of uncertainty with regards to their the good faith efforts. But again, it's tokenization, funding new startup ideas. It comes back to what we were talking about with are companies going to be replacing IPOs with launching tokens? And so this internet capital markets thing is really around tokenized equity. And it's really about just fundraising and tokenization of ideas and getting founders and getting creators access to basically any amount of capital formation possible at a global scale in a democratized fashion. So look, I think it's a really cool meta. I think as with all metas, there's a lot of haters and there's a lot of shady stuff happening. But I wouldn't be surprised if this launch coin, this Believe app, ends up being a start to a massive trend where, again, it's all aligned with there's going to be a lot more blockchains, there's going to be a lot more tokens. This is now about there's going to be a lot more tokenized ideas and crowdfunding from these ideas.
Yeah, I think the pessimistic position and argument around Launchcoin and the Believe app is that this is another pump.fun. This is a launchpad for meme coins. There's no real value here. I'm less interested in those sorts of takes, and I'm more interested in the ability for these launchpads to democratize markets. I'm interested in taking down the barrier of entry into these markets and not only allowing investors and people around the world to have access to these markets for more fair and more efficient capital formation and capital efficiency in these markets. I'm more so interested in the capital formation and democratization of these markets for founders. For exactly what we said at the grand scale, this is the question: do you launch a token or do you go public? At the micro scale for startups, this is a question of, do I raise venture or do I ICO? Do I raise venture or do I go onto a launch pad and derive some sort of retail funding from my proposed community? I think this question is more interesting to ask. And I think there is a reality where we do take down the barrier of entry to these markets. And ultimately, we see more interesting and local experiments get funding. I think you could have, these companies that are no longer necessary to have 25, 30 people working in order to find some product market fit, get some revenue, and ultimately tackle a big idea. I think with the power of AI, you're going to have much smaller driven companies that are entirely founder focused with AI employees at their fingertips, 5, 10,000 employees that are entirely autonomous AI agents that are working on behalf of this company. And then I think you're also going to have the ability to launch fundraising mechanisms through things like Launchcoin and Believe. I don't think this is a platform for meme coin, shit coin degeneracy. I think this is a platform for startups to experiment and even raise micro rounds, right? Before this was
Yep.
friends and family, but there's a lot of regulation that goes along with that too. I think
Yep.
the transition and the progression of deregulation that's happening is supportive of these trends. And I think launch pads are going to help these startup entrepreneurs raise capital from a more targeted market and not onboard predatory VCs.
Yep. Yep. I mean, look, if we can scroll down just a bit, if we get a chance on this tweet, there's an epic photo here that kind of outlays the internet capital markets. There's a nice graphic here that I want to pull up that shows the different coins and the Believe ecosystem and the Pump.fun ecosystem there. And so on this graphic, you can see Dupe, Gooncoin, Creator Buddy, Auroscope, and Fitted and Giggles. So these are kind of like meme coins, but again, there is a product status associated with these. And there is a unique angle from, okay, so Dupe is a real product utility founded from a legit Web2 company. Gooncoin is the fart coin of the Believe ecosystem. No product, meme coin only with strong PA volume. Creator Buddy is a live AI tool for creators. So again, it's like they're basically just like tokenizing businesses and ideas. Like it reminds me of Kaido. Like Kaido started and is not some sort of like, open blockchain ecosystem. It's very much so a private business. And to me, this is kind of what these are showing. And so like, look, like Fitted live AI wardrobe app, 300K downloads. So then you kind of go over to the Pump.fun ecosystem and, there's like kind of some similarities, but yeah, I think this Believe launch is going to be something to take note of and to be a part of. And I think there's going to be a lot more to come here. So I pay attention. Haven't really purchased much or done much there yet.
One last note here is when we look at Believe, I think this is indicative of some grander meta that has gotten picked up by the Ethereum and the Solana communities and the blockchain Web3 ecosystem at large. It's not just about Believe calling their launch internet capital markets for fundraising and launch padding. We've gotten this convergence in narrative market fit between Ethereum, the world computer, and Solana, the most efficient, best capital markets, right? Trying to replace the NASDAQ, trying to replace the stock market. And I think this is where ultimately all of us agree, which is nice to kind of feel like we're on the same team again as we, again, try to cross the chasm. I think we're stronger as an industry to do it together. I think the reason that this meta has gotten picked up so strongly is because both Ethereum and Solana feel comfortable backing it. Internet capital markets is something that I think both of these communities can get behind. And the reason is because capital markets are one thing that you can do on the new internet. The world computer is the support system for the new internet, and capital markets are an extremely important piece of that, everything that goes into high frequency trading. So that's one of the reasons that I think internet capital markets has gotten picked up so strongly, and both of these communities are starting to run with it. I think it's an extremely optimistic thing that, I mean, maybe it just takes a couple of green candles, right? And then all of a sudden we're on the same team again, everyone's friendly. But I do think that this is optimistic, that this is a narrative that we found that we can all rally behind.
Yeah. We'll see how the capital market stuff plays out. We got our last quick segment here before our first guest, Haseeb, crypto fantasy draft, which rival devs would Vitalik draft. Look, I just think that like Max Resnick leaving Ethereum for Solana is pretty hilarious. And I think like it would be funny to have like, it'd be funny. I saw a tweet from Signal, right? It was like, okay, we should take tech companies and similar to how like NBA and NHL companies have, free agents and trade waivers and deadlines and drafts, we should be trading employees like publicly and like make this into like a sport. Now, obviously there's probably moral and ethical reasons as to why people's careers are more than entertainment. But, I think in this overly digital world, I think it'd be particularly interesting. I don't really have a draft player, but I just think this idea was worth talking about, where crypto's kind of more similar in that sense, but people are just a bit more public about like where they're going. I don't really have an answer to the question though.
I don't think we're going to spend a ton of time on this because it is an extremely slippery slope here.
Yeah, you start like gambling on people's career moves and shit, and then like betting in like stocks and
the one thing that I will mention, and I think there's a parallel that we can draw between this concept that we're talking about of trading employees, and you draw a parallel to professional athletes. Look, when a player gets onto a team and they don't agree with the GM or they don't agree with the way the team is ran or managed, they stop playing hard. They stop believing in the team's ideology. And I think that is a similar risk that you could run into. You get traded to a team, you don't really believe in the overall grand vision of the company or the product. You're going to end up with a very similar phenomenon that you have where employees stop working hard. They don't really believe in the long-term vision. So I think it's funny to think about. It's a great thought experiment, but we've got a real, not theoretical, we've got a real Haseeb with us.
Coming up next, here we go. We had some fun questions for him. I think this should be a good segment. I don't really know how he's going to respond to these, so let's get him up. These should be interesting. Haseeb's in the building.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Where are you calling from today, man?
I'm at home here on the West Coast, but I'm headed to London tonight.
Sweet, cool. Man. Always on the move. Rob and I were at a research day today in New York for a couple hours, watched some good talks.
Nice.
On the infra side, there's a bunch of just, technical people there. It's pretty good.
Very good. Very good.
It's a pleasure to have you on. We, we've only been doing a couple of these shows, and I think you've got a unique insight and a unique perspective on the industry. So I'm really, really stoked to get into it. And you want to kick us off here with the first question for Haseeb?
Yeah, man. I mean, so we were just talking about Nakamoto raising 710 million, Jack Mallers buying a ton of Bitcoin, and obviously Michael Saylor. And so our first spicy question for you is, why would you run DragonFi and do all the work of doing VC and all of these due diligence and all this stuff when you could just collect fees on Bitcoin and run like a Bitcoin strategy company?
Yeah, I'll tell you, every cycle, it looks like there's somebody who's making money way easier than you are. And it's always temporarily true. And in the long run, it's not true. Is that, over a long enough period of time, I mean, the thing about venture is that venture, more or less, it always works in that there are always founders building something new that is worthy of investment and that is going to do well. It's not necessarily in the same sector all the time, but it's something that always works because there's always need for capital. There's always need for capital markets. But whether it's launching an NFT collection or whether it's being the new meme coin platform or whether it's doing these MicroStrategy type knockoffs, like it's going to work until it doesn't. Where the point at which these things start trading at NAV or at a discount to NAV, obviously this playbook is going to stop working, and these things can't work forever, right? People will issue enough debt, and they will keep doing this over and over and over again until all these things end up compressing down to NAV, except for maybe one. Right? It may well be that MicroStrategy is the only one that gets away with it, but like we saw this before with GBTC. It is not in principle all that different of a mechanism. As long as these things trade at a premium, people will still do it until they push the premium down below 1.
Now, quick question for you on this one, and I think MicroStrategy and 21 Capital and Nakamoto, these sort of operate a little bit differently. So I think what we were all seeing on GBTC was the opportunity for redemptions, right? And that was sort of what compressed the discount or the premium, because then you could freely go in and out. When you're looking at something like a 21 Capital and you see the priority around Bitcoin per share, suppose they do implement something like redemptions. Do you think that is a positive or negative mechanism for the survival of this company long term?
Look, people obviously will not implement redemptions, and for something, for something like GBTC, obviously the marginal buyer of GBTC could not redeem, and that was part of the mechanism behind the trust. Is that you can create, but there's no actual mechanism to redeem. It's a one-way street where Bitcoin goes in and no Bitcoin comes out unless there's a liquidation, right? If they get margin called and they have to sell the assets in order to pay their debts, that is the only situation in which Bitcoin exits that vehicle. So now that being said, I'm not implying that this thing is going to do what GBTC did. It's a very different object, and it acquires capital in a very different kind of way than the way that GBTC does. Right? GBTC did not issue debt. These it's financial engineering of a very different kind. And clearly the kind of leverage that Michael Saylor is able to get and that all these vehicles are able to get is better than the kind of leverage you could get on your own going on Binance and, going levered long on a perp, right? You're going to get blown up really fast if you try to get levered on Bitcoin yourself. But the corporate debt market just operates very differently than the kind of short-term leverage you might get in a normal crypto exchange. So that's why these things work the way they work, is that there's, in a way, a sort of leverage arbitrage that's taking place here. But again, the fundamental laws of economic gravity have not been suspended. As long as these things trade above NAV, people will keep doing this over and over again until eventually it stops. Like, you will eventually saturate the debt market, right? Period. Or you'll just buy so much Bitcoin that there's no one left to sell.
That is just a wild thought that that Bitcoin would eventually saturate the debt market. Like coming from where we've came from, that is just wow. That's something.
But at a certain point, you hit a wall, right? Depends on you don't know which wall you're going to hit first, but you're going to hit one of the walls.
Yeah. Well, Brian Armstrong said everyone and their mother will be buying Bitcoin. They're going to be buying it in their 401k. They're going to have exposure. Coinbase just joined the S&P 500. What do you think Brian Armstrong understands about building in crypto that most founders still don't understand?
I mean, it's exactly what I just said, which is building for the long term. Coinbase now has been around, 12 years? This is a marathon to them. This is not a sprint. They're not trying to win any one cycle. They're trying to win the long game. And you've seen their very regulation-first approach, constantly taking their customers and their regulators into account when they're thinking about how to build their business, not leaning into every single narrative, but instead thinking about the long arc of, okay, how do we become the venue for ETFs? How do we partner with BlackRock and all these wealth managers and make this the gateway for regulated crypto within the US? That has been their strategy. Now they're, $60 billion business? Absolutely incredible outcome for everybody who's been building this thing. And the thing that I think many people in crypto could take away from Coinbase, people like to dunk on Coinbase. Obviously, they just had a black eye today with the announcement of this big hack and ransom that they were responding to this morning, which I don't know if you guys have already spoken about it. But look, they've had their shares of stumbles. Happens all the time. But at the end of the day, the thing that everybody knows about Coinbase is that their heart is in the right place. And they're constantly pushing the vanguard for the industry for the long term, whether it was fighting the SEC, whether it was pushing BlackRock and becoming the clearing venue for all these ETFs, like that, you can only really get that from being extremely long term. And there's so many teams in crypto that don't really have this DNA, and Coinbase does, and it's just so rare to see.
Yeah, I've just been bull posting Coinbase on here as my one and only stock holding, which is pretty degen of me.
Very well.
That's just how I am. So,
nice.
On the note of these kind of institutional consumer-facing applications, Robinhood's been doing a lot of teasing, and they actually just acquired WonderFi. So it kind of begs the question for me about distribution and the way this opinionated infra stacks and this kind of verticalization of owning the stack is going to work and play out, in your opinion. So from your perspective, is it easier for Robinhood to build Solana or Solana to build Robinhood? Who's going to eat whose lunch first in a hypothetical like this?
That's an interesting way to frame the question. Look, the reality is that it's really hard for both of them to build each other, right? They're just completely different animals. Building a centralized exchange, the thing that you have to respect when you look at Coinbase, right? Coinbase is not necessarily the best product. It's not necessarily the fastest exchange. That people were clowning on them for. They recently launched 4-hour candles, I think, and people were like,
that was hilarious.
You didn't have 4-hour candles. You're a 13-year-old company with an exchange, and you don't have 4-hour candles. But so the reality, look, it's not necessarily the best product, but it's the most trusted product. And that is the thing that you're ultimately competing on when you're building an exchange, is that it's not about having more features than the next guy. It's about having the most robust overall platform. And in the same way, you can probably get a Kraken or a Coinbase to go build an L1, but will the L1 be trusted? Will it be neutral? Will it be perceived as being the same kind of bazaar that everybody can bring their wares to and compete on an equal playing field? Not necessarily, right? That's why you see, Coinbase has their L2 base. Obviously, it's been very successful, but it's nowhere near the scale of Solana or an Ethereum because of the fact that it's not neutral, right? It's a corporate L2. I think these are great. Kraken has its own with Inc., but that's a far cry from what we're trying to build with this globally neutral substrate, which is the layer ones themselves, right? That's why Base and Ink are built on Ethereum, right? They settle to another chain that actually is credibly neutral. But if it was built by a corporation, of course it wouldn't be. And that's not the role they're trying to play.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, it's different strokes for different folks. I think it's beneficial for the industry as a whole that we get this bifurcation. Everyone is able to fit a different gap in the market. And that's why these guys are valued what they are. Haseeb, one thing that we've been talking about going back and forth a little bit as we're seeing more companies launch in the public markets, Galaxy with their IPO is due to come out tomorrow on the NASDAQ. We're kind of going back and forth and on the fence. Do we think that there's going to be tokens and equities available for companies? Will companies that go public also have tokens? Or is this a one-way street? What is going to determine what path these companies take, whether to go the equity path, the public path, or they go the token path? Do you think it's possible for companies to go public and also launch tokens? Ultimately, how do you think these two paths play out?
So look, that's ultimately a regulatory question. And that regulatory question is going to be settled by this SEC or CFTC, probably come the market structure bill that's currently working its way through Congress. So you can imagine a world where we have well-defined definitions of what is a security and what is a commodity. And if you do, there's nothing that stops a company that has stock from issuing a token, as long as that token falls within the legal bounds. But one thing is very clear. If you're a public company, you're not just going to take a guess. You're not going to be like, hey, I think it's probably fine to launch this thing. Because if you get delisted from the NASDAQ or you get slapped down by the SEC and you say, hey, you can no longer be a public company, that is just such an absolute disaster. Nobody's going to take that risk, especially when, in such ebullient capital markets that are already rewarding you and giving you liquidity, right? It's possible that someday that you see Base launch a layer 2 token. It's possible someday that you see, Uniswap Labs go public, even while Uniswap protocol is itself a decentralized protocol. None of these things are incompatible with each other. Same thing with Etherealize, right? Etherealize is this company that's built on top of Ethereum. They could potentially go public even when Ethereum itself has of course, a decentralized token. So the thing that we ultimately need for this is regulatory clarity. But we've already seen, MicroStrategy is basically a big pile of Bitcoin that's public on the NASDAQ. We've yet to see other companies do this for other assets. I guess technically somebody's doing it with Trump token, but I guess meme coins are definitely not securities, so I guess that's technically kosher. But getting this kind of full stack where you have an actual token, then of course the question, which many people have raised about Uniswap, which is, okay, how do the fees break down? Right? In crypto, very often people kind of just close their eyes and buy the thing based on the mimetic value. So it's like, oh, this token has this name on it, therefore I'll buy it. In the stock market, that's not how it works, right? So if you see that, well, Coinbase is going to give half the revenues to this token and half the revenues to the stock, well, the stock is going to plummet by half in like 10 minutes. In crypto, we don't necessarily see that level of market efficiency, but it will get reflected on the other side of the ledger if you see a company have both a stock and token,
and vice versa, right? You have Uniswap that launches or goes public, and all of a sudden they say, "Look, we're going to be directing our revenue, right, not to the token, but we're going to be directing it to the stakeholders and pay a dividend." There, you would anticipate that their token would drop to half value, and that value would go to the stock in the form of that dividend. I have a quick follow up here, and then we'll move on to our next one, which is that if you were speaking to Congress and you were advising Congress on this market structure bill, what would you say are the 2 to 3 things to keep in mind if Congress is working this through and they're writing the laws? What should they include in the market structure bill so that we recognize both the public markets and the tokenized markets and have a market structure that works for both?
Yeah. Candidly, I think actually the market structure bill is pretty good. I think it's a big improvement over FIT 21.
Could you break it down for us into the main components here?
Oh, I'm not going to be able to do a good job of that. They originally had this concept of a decentralization test. They've now replaced it with a maturity test. There are a bunch of thresholds that are in there now. So obviously they divide up what the SEC and the CFTC are responsible for. There's a notion of graduating into becoming a mature blockchain. Before you're a mature blockchain, there are certain limitations on what you can do, what you can sell, the sort of ownership thresholds, and you have a certain amount of time. I think those numbers are still being baked as the bill itself is being debated about when a blockchain, quote unquote, matures. And then once it matures, it gets treated more like a commodity. And part of maturing is that, okay, you're decentralized, you don't have too much centralized ownership or too much collective ownership. I think one of the big problems right now with the bill is there's a lot of there's a lot of focus on ownership thresholds. So there's this idea like, oh, if you own more than 1% of the token or more than 10% of the token, then more than 20% of the token, you're at this versus this versus this. And the reality is that crypto is a global market, right? And so, if you say that, well, somebody who owns 10% of the token is not allowed to do X, how is that going to be policed practically? Right. So many of the people who are participants in these networks are not in the US. They're not subject to US jurisdiction. So some Chinese guy owns 10% of a token and he's like dumping it on day one. Somebody in, let's say there's somebody's on Hyperliquid, somebody's on Binance. How exactly is the US going to regulate these laws getting enforced on these other domains? So I think there's a little bit of a kind of Pollyannishness about this bill in certain parts, where it assumes that there is some sort of eye of Sauron that can look over what's happening in all of these crypto markets, which is just not practical, right? Especially when a lot of these things are trading on DEXs. So that I think is one of the biggest weaknesses of the bill. But overall, I think the bill is actually a real, you can tell there's been a lot more sophistication in Congress about the real problems in the digital asset industry. Now, all that being said, this is the version of the bill that they got after talking to a lot of insiders. Right. After talking to the trade organizations and the exchanges and the VCs and all the other people who are making their voices known on the Hill, it's yet to get chopped up and kind of, compromised. And it's only once that happens that we're going to actually get a glimpse of what the real bill is going to look like. So this is the best the bill is ever going to be. It's only getting worse from here. And so I think you can sort of reserve your judgment until you see the thing that's actually going to be up for vote. That's the time when it's, you want to start making noises and really calling out what needs to be improved in the bill. But right now, honestly, if this thing as it exists today got passed, I think it's a really big improvement for the status quo and significantly better than FIT21.
Yeah. I mean, we've been waiting for this for so long, right? Just like some clarity. That was the big thing about Gensler's campaign the last 6 years or whatever it's been, is that teams just had no idea what to do, like what they could or couldn't do. It was just kind of like shooting in the dark. So something like this provides a bit more of a framework for, do's, don'ts, and best practices. And I think it's going to just add to the acceleration of institutional adoption. On the kind of opposite side of this realm, we've got very interesting dynamic happening on chain right now with Hyperliquid. Hyperliquid's open interest has bumped up to, I think, over 6 bill. I think recently hit 6.7 bill. My question to you, Haseeb, is if you're CZ, sitting on your billions and your 10 million Twitter followers, you're watching Hyperliquid hit $6, $7, $8 billion in open interest, what would you do about it?
It's a good question. You have to assume that all the centralized exchanges are doing everything they can right now to fight back against Hyperliquid, because, in absolute terms, Hyperliquid is still pretty small on the global stage, right? If you look at the biggest exchange in the world, Hyperliquid is still, I think they're in the top 10, but they're not that far in the top 10. So the answer is probably a combination of multiple things. One, my guess is that there's a lot of conversations happening behind closed doors to regulators about Hyperliquid, especially now that Hyperliquid is going to end up in the news more and more. Not just as, it's a big exchange, but also it's the natural place to go because it's totally decentralized for market manipulation, right? For sending hacked funds. All the stuff that people are whispering about, North Korea was preparing to use Hyperliquid. The bigger Hyperliquid gets, the more this stuff is going to happen. And that's naturally going to draw a lot more attention and ire towards Hyperliquid compared to what it's been standing historically. When you're small, you can get away with being like, we're kind of just doing what we're doing. The same thing was true with Tornado. Tornado was more or less operating underneath most people's attention until North Korea noticed. And after the Ronin hack, Tornado Cash all of a sudden became this very central story for many people's imaginations when previously they never heard of it. I'd expect you'll probably start to see regulators around the world start to take notice of Hyperliquid. Now, that being said, Hyperliquid, their job in order to get past this is to decentralize aggressively. And this is one of the most common criticisms I've seen of Hyperliquid is that their decentralization is obviously incomplete. The team is still very, very actively iterating and developing stuff, and you need that in order to be. At the end of the day, Hyperliquid's still a startup, and they have a lot of work to do to compete with centralized exchanges on all of their features and all the dimensions on which they should. The other thing, of course, that you might be worried about for Hyperliquid is that Coinbase is making a lot of progress on getting perps approved by the CFTC for the US. If you start to see perps in the US, that is a lot of the demand for Hyperliquid is basically venues, countries where they don't have access to trading on perps, right? You can't get on Binance, you can't get on Bybit if you're a US citizen, but you can trade on Hyperliquid. So this kind of regulatory arbitrage may go away, not because of regulation against Hyperliquid, but the opposite of the regulation opening up to US customers. So now that being said, again, one of Hyperliquid's benefits is the fact that it has very good liquidity and it has relatively low fees. If you see perps launched by Coinbase in the US, I guarantee you it's going to be a high fee product. That's kind of Coinbase's MO is that they're able to demand very, very high fees relative to most of their other competitors. So that may be the saving grace for Hyperliquid, but the game is just starting, right? Now Hyperliquid is a player, and once you're a player, all the weapons come out. So I think they're a very strong team. They've executed super well, but nobody here has the mandate of heaven. You have to fight every single day in the exchange market because it's extremely competitive.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It seems like Coinbase may be a bit more of a potential threat than Binance and the other exchanges. But as you said, I'm sure there's a lot of things happening behind closed doors. Competition's fierce, especially with market makers, with the fee generation from these perps exchanges, from the token performance. Binance hasn't listed Hype. Binance hasn't listed Fartcoin. Hyperliquid just listed Fartcoin. None of these centralized exchanges will list Hype, except for Qcoin and a couple others. So very interesting times there on Hyperliquid. Last one for you, Haseeb. I know you spent quite a bit of time with Balaji back in the day doing kind of like mentorship stuff and working together. What was one important thing that you learned from him, which you still think about today?
One important thing that I learned from him. Honestly, one of the most pivotal pieces of advice that he gave me that led to me building what I'm building today at Dragonfly was, at the time before I came into Dragonfly, I was really uncertain what I wanted to do. I just left another fund that was the fund run by Naval called Metastable Capital. And I was a free agent. I was looking around trying to see, hey, should I join something? Should I start something? I wasn't really sure. And I really felt like maybe I should join one of these bigger platforms like Polychain or A16Z. This was way back in the day. So they were not nearly as big as they are today. And the thing that Balaji told me was that the number one thing you should optimize for is agency. Go to the place, do the thing that's going to give you the most agency, such that you can actually make the decision yourself of whether or not to write the check, of deciding how to build the brand your own. And it may be hard. When we first started Dragonfly, we were nobodies. Like, actually, nobody knew who the hell we were. I remember the first deal I ever did was the seed round of Matter Labs, which is the company behind ZK Sync. And that seed round was a very competitive round. And people only knew me because I'd written some blog posts. I was kind of one of these guys who are just sort of mouthing off on Twitter, writing think pieces. And at that time, literally when I got on a call with Alex, the founder of Matter Labs, he was like, I've never heard of Dragonfly. I don't know who the hell you guys are, but I saw your post on Twitter. I thought you're pretty smart. Here's a little, here's $100K for you guys. And that was our first ever deal. So going on that journey of building Dragonfly into what it is today, I wouldn't be here doing what I am doing now if it wasn't for that advice from Balaji. And it's a piece of advice that I reflect to all the young people who ask me for advice on what they should do in their career, which is optimize for agency. Whoever's going to give you the most responsibility, go there. Doesn't matter how much money it is, doesn't matter how much prestige it is. Like, ultimately, that's the best way to bet on yourself.
And
Amazing.
learn.
Yeah, exactly. And fuck up and make mistakes and then learn from them and take
100%.
risks.
100%.
Haseeb, thanks for coming on, man. Always a pleasure to have you on. Safe travels to London. And
Thanks for having me.
Hope you enjoyed the new segment.
Ciao.
Thanks, Haseeb. See you next time. Man, insights. left and right there.
That was
Um,
fun, man.
that was a
I
lot
just
of fun.
like the rapid fire questions of this format, right? Where you can just get like, 10, 5, I think we got like 6, 8 questions out
Mhm.
and all different topics. And he was just able to answer a lot of them really well. So excited for that. Up next, we're going to roll into our guy, Gavin. Gavin is building Focus Tree. But any last reflections there on that conversation with Haseeb?
Well, I've talked about my origin story on the podcast before. I got into Bitcoin and crypto by playing poker. So I would love to play some poker with Haseeb sometime soon. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Reflections on some of the insights that he talked about today. I think ultimately he's got a lot of perspective and information and insights about the market structure here. I know, he talked a little bit about the potential bill, but ultimately I think it's more interesting to think about the theoretical market structure that could play out between Uniswap going public, given they already have a token, or Coinbase launching a base token. I think these are some things that are very real considerations for people at these companies. At Uniswap, I'd imagine Hayden's thinking about this. Brian is thinking about this at Coinbase. So that was right. That's a fascinating, just to like put ourselves in their shoes. Also to think about, look, there are dynamics that are playing out on chain and the dynamics of VC that are happening in the private markets. I do think we're going to continue to see the democratization of these markets. We're going to lower barriers of entry, and these markets are going to start to blend together. But I believe that we're going to see a lot more depth and well-roundedness to these markets. So to think about how private markets, public markets, liquid and tokenized markets all blend together, I think from an investor standpoint, it's super fascinating to think about.
Yep, I agree. We got Gavin coming up next from Focus Tree. Let's get him up here. Let's get going here and hear more about Focus Tree. Welcome on, man. Good to see you.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Andy. Hello, Robbie.
Hey there. It's good to meet you too. And I think to celebrate Starknet going to stage 1 Rollup, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, that's a great day. So many good news to happen to Starknet recently.
Are you calling in from France, man?
I do. Yeah.
What's your takes on these recent robberies in Paris? It's not looking good for the crypto bros out there, man.
Yeah, the one thing I told your editor just before entering the room, I just said, can you remove my last name, please? So you have my answer, right?
Okay.
Man, yeah, that's a good call right there. We're coming out there with the crypto conference coming up in ECC in Cannes.
Yeah, in Cannes, not in Paris, but it's just a wild videos to see. ECC's been there in Paris so many times, but anyway, we didn't bring you on to talk about Paris, but I was just curious if you had any thoughts there.
I mean, it's really sad. I won't lie. I think all my talented friends and founders, they just left the country. Actually, my co-founder left the country as well. So yeah, now that's really sad to see for me, and political people won't react to this. I'm pretty sure of that. So yeah, the only option left is to leave France. Sadly, if you're a crypto founder.
Yeah, man. I mean, so look, I live in New York City. Rob's here as well. There's a lot of stuff going on in the subways and stuff, but it seems to be a bit more targeted towards crypto there. But zooming out towards, kind of this New York analogy to Focus Tree here is that when New York is like the epicenter of phone usage. Like it is like it's like a beehive for bumblebees on their phones. And so, you're on the subway, you're walking around in the city, and everyone's on their phone. Like it is an epidemic. I recently noticed it at gyms as well. I'm curious if you had, if you had a story or just kind of a relationship with your own technology or kind of what led you to think more about mindfulness as being an important aspect of life. Because for me now, it's like I'm seeing it every day, day in and day out. And like being in the city with all the stimulation, it does feel like my level of mindfulness has just slowly dropped. And so perhaps I need to download Focus Tree right now.
Yeah, I think you should. But no, yeah, totally. I think we started Focus Tree 3 years ago, and the problem was not that much of now. Like right now, the timing is really important. It's really crazy because now TikTok is more addictive than ever, and all those distractions. And I think people are more aware of the problem. But 3 years ago when we started, it was just after Steppen blew up, and I had so many friends who just started in crypto because of Steppen. They started to work to do sport, and I always been in self development, and actually my co-founder as well. And we look at this movement with Steppen, where people would actually change their behavior just because of financial incentives. So that's really we were like, okay, that's huge. It's probably not sustainable, but how could we use crypto to kind of build a new productivity app? And at the time we used a tons of screen timer apps, and none of them were working for us because they just assume you were already disciplined. So they would say like, block your phone. So you would do that, and then on the evening you would just want to watch a YouTube video or whatever, and you would uninstall the app. So none of these apps were working for us, and it was become a huge problem in our life. And we were like, okay, let's try to gamify a focus app in the way Steppen did for a step app. So that's how it got started.
Amazing. Yeah. And for anyone who doesn't know, this is part of the consumer application wave. You guys have upwards of a few 100,000 daily active users, maybe monthly active users, and these people have no idea that they're on chain, right? That's the beauty of it. So talk to us. How are you able to onboard these users and put them on chain without them knowing, and still provide them incentives so that they are changing their behavior in this more mindful way?
So just small disclaimer, guys, we're not building a Steppen, we're not building a Ponzi. Just to be clear, but that's how we got started. So very quickly we realized we couldn't just give away money for free and expect it would be sustainable, right? That's obvious, but we tried a bunch of stuff. So we were like, okay, how could we use crypto to actually make the app more sticky? How could we create this habit? And the idea was to use random NFTs and a bit like a casino. So when you would block your phone for 10 minutes at minimum, but maybe 1 hour. And then when you come back, you would get this tile, which is an NFT. And some of them are pretty common, so they're worth 0. But some of them would be limited to, let's say, 100 or 10 in supply, depending on rarity. And yeah, that's because they're so rare, and because of demand and value. Anyway, because of market demand, those items have a price, and that was $10 to $300. So this adds a little bit more of motivation for students, because they want to collect them all, and it's pretty it makes them valuable. And how it really blew up in I would say November, 6 months ago. Because we found a way, especially my co-founder found a way to grow Focus Tree on TikTok, and we decided, okay, it's pretty hard to get at it. Crypto natives, it's a very small market if you think about it, and many startups are fighting for attention. It's like a red ocean. So we were like, okay, what if we go in this blue ocean of Web2 students? And actually, we are building on Starknet, so we have all those tools like account abstraction, Paymaster to sponsor gas fees, all these tools to completely abstract the blockchain. And if we were to do that, there's no competition for students, and it was pretty easy for us to grow. And actually, we're growing at 40-50% rates every month. We increase the amount of daily active users. So yeah, that's pretty good. That's going well for us.
Yeah, so you've brought in hundreds of thousands of users to Starknet. Then, what were some of the challenges that you had when you were bringing mainstream users to crypto? Was it primarily about this distribution, as you mentioned, on TikTok? Was it about education? What have some of the unexpected challenges been?
So, in the original version of Focus Tree, we had this what we call wallet V1. You would need it's a basic wallet, we all know. You needed to store your seed phrase, you needed to on-ramp some ETH or Stark to pay gas fees, and they wouldn't understand why do I need to do that? I just want to block my phone, right? And it makes sense for them. So the approach we have with Focus Tree is oh, you know what? You don't even need to know anything. They probably don't even know they're on Starknet. And the idea is like when we get big enough, like let's say 1 million monthly active users, this kind of numbers, the idea is we're gonna partner with crypto projects, a bit like a launchpad, model. And we're gonna do 1 month focus challenges branded with those partners, and we're gonna give away an amount of actual tokens that they can earn when they focus. And then we will educate them like actually to claim this value, like let's say $50, $10. You need like to understand what this project is doing, like what is the blockchain, and we offer like one-click staking or stablecoin yields, this kind of stuff. So the idea is like to start first. They all have an account. They all start to collect NFTs, and then let's say 10% of them, 5% of them, they will earn some actual valuable reward, and they will have an incentive to really understand like, okay, what can I do? And I think our goal here is to have actual people to deploy like let's say $1,000 and start to generate yielding right inside their focus app. That would be a huge victory for us.
Okay, so you guys are using TikTok for getting people into Focus Tree. So you're using TikTok to get people off of TikTok. So if you could have control over TikTok or Instagram, what would be one feature you would change to make it less addictive?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely this random reward I just discussed. That's actually what we use to make Focus Tree addictive.
Okay.
Like, yeah, it's like on Twitter, like the fact that when you scroll, you don't know what's gonna happen next, and this is super addictive. And if you think about it, all products you use daily, they incorporate this mechanism. That's also why we incorporate it, and that's how we kind of build this habit of focusing. And yeah, I would just remove that. Like, if you make this app more predictable, they would no longer be addictive.
So you also employed an addictive sort of behavioral psychology to combat the malicious and predatory behavioral psychology on TikTok. Do you think? What's that?
It's for your own good. Yeah.
Exactly.
I can tell you what, there are tons of focus apps, and they are all done by they are done by founders like me, 30 years old tech bros, for themselves. So they all look black and white. They assume you can control yourself. You're already self-disciplined, but they didn't understand what's a human. Like most humans, they just eat McDonald's and drink soda. So our take, and we are the only one to do that, is to say, you know what, we're gonna create an addiction to not being addicted. And that sounds weird, but it works. So yeah.
Did you have one moment in your past where you felt that you were addicted? Was there like a light bulb moment and you said, oh, I have to do this. I have to create Focus Tree and make a change? What was that? How did you come to that realization?
Yeah, I think the worst part for me was when I went to bed. I couldn't sleep without something in my ears, without watching a YouTube video or listening to a podcast. And my girlfriend was so pissed. Like she was like, "Okay, no phone in bed," this kind of stuff. And you know what? We've done countless of user interviews, and I'm not the only one. And it's a huge problem, and it's bad for demographics as well. So yeah, I think that's a huge motivation for me if we can help just at this moment when you want to spend time with your loved one. I think it would be a huge win for us.
So you come to this idea, you have this inspiration from sleep time with your girlfriend and just kind of understanding that it's tough to go to bed. I use white noise when I go to bed all the time. Rain sounds, that's my vibe. But so you go from that, you start to build out this application. You realize that you want to put this on crypto rails, and somehow you end up then building on Starknet. What was the thought process towards your more technical choices as to how and where you wanted to build this out on the crypto rails and specifically on Starknet?
Yeah. So if you look for it, I've wrote an article back then with my thought process on why Starknet. But if you remember, in 2022, it was pretty clear for everyone that Ethereum was a clear winner. And then the roadmap was clear, like, okay, it's going to be the L2s. And then among the L2s, there were the optimistic rollups and the ZK rollups. And if you think from first principle, I was convinced like, okay, ZK Rollup are gonna win. They're the end game, and I think Vitalik kind of confirmed that recently, confirmed that the Starkware vision was right. And back then, there was like Polygon and Maiden and a few teams building ZK rollups. There were ZK Think, mainly ZK Think and Starkware. So I went to discuss with both CEOs on Twitter, like trying to understand what was the status. I think there was not even a mainnet for ZK Think. But what really convinced me with Starkware, I think it was their clear vision. And I think they are right. Like even before that, since 2018, they are right. Like Sorare and DYDX used to be on that tech, and those are pure consumer product where chain is completely abstracted. So I think they've always been building scalable tech in production, and always I knew like if I built on Starkware, it wouldn't be like building on Luna and the chain doesn't exist in 2 years, So that's what I wanted. So the last reason was the community. I think it was pretty easy to talk to founders and Starkware people and everyone would help each other because of the Cairo language. It was really hard to get to start there. So a great community, great tech, great vision. To summarize.
Yeah, I think they're leading the scaling race for sure. I mean, in the beginning, the chain was a bit expensive, a bit slow, but now it's really gotten fast and cheap and is scaling.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's going to help you, right, as you scale. I think you may even at some point consider launching your own chain, and going through that process, which I think would be particularly interesting for you as well. Last thing before we let you go, Gavin, you are going to get to millions of users and then maybe tens of millions of users on a daily or monthly basis. I believe in you. I think it's going to happen. I think you guys can do it. How do you get there? How do you get there though? What is your 10x from here? Like what is the 10x from here for Focus Tree?
Yeah. So just as a bit of context, the growth comes from two things: acquisition and retention. When you think in terms of it's a combination of both. In terms of acquisition, where I think we have an edge in our comprehension and strategy. I don't want to talk too much about that, but we have ways to scale how to get attention on TikTok. And Laurent, my co-founder, has been teaching that to other founders. When it comes to retention, we've been iterating on a weekly basis a lot and very fast. And just to give you a sense of our progress, we've tripled the D30 retention. So the number of people who still use the product after 1 month, we tripled that in the last 3 months. So that's huge. And now we have a better retention than Strava and than many products. So we are still not there, but we do have a huge growth. But then when it comes to vision, we really want to do more. Like, okay, you block your phone, but what do you do when you block your phone? And because our main audience is students, we want to help them study. So we're gonna go more into this future of education, like probably record what the teacher says when they focus, and then they're gonna be able to do quiz and flashcards fine-tuned on their actual courses. And I think you could think of what about if I'm in Europe and I want to get access to the best business Harvard business the best business course in the world. Then I could query this fine-tuned chat on the Harvard Business School materials through Focus Tree, and you could tokenize that, and the one like the teacher would get credits every time a student anywhere in the world would query this LLM. So yeah, we have a vision around education in general and really tackle all the vertical around students, not just focus.
Gavin, that makes so much sense. We just had Haseeb from Dragonfly Capital on talking about agency, and a through line that I can trace here is that as these students are moving off of their phones and they're not being fed what to think about and what the content is and what they're seeing on social media, they revert to their own intention. They revert to their own agency, and then you can turn the application once they move away from the opposite of agency and they start to take their control back into their own hands, you can start to give them tooling and technology to help them improve their own agency from there. So I think ultimately this is something that it's helping the world. I think you're thinking about it in a very counterintuitive way. And I think, this is super valuable for not just, and especially young people, but, ultimately everyone is on social media now. This could be scaled up, to our parents' age and beyond. So thank you so much for coming on. I'm curious, where can people find Focus Tree? Is it mobile first? It's on the App Store.
Yeah.
How can people find it and get it on their phones?
Yeah, go to your App Store, whatever it is, iOS, Android, iPad, whatever, and look for Focus Tree and just try it and give us your feedback on Twitter. I would read it, and thanks so much for inviting us to talk about Focus Tree and Starknet here.
Absolutely. We welcome you back on when we're at 1 million users, okay?
Yeah. Let's keep in touch then.
I got it, boys. I'm going on it. I'm
Thanks,
focusing.
Andy.
It's time to lock in.
Let's focus.
It's time to
Amazing.
lock in, boys.
Guys.
Focus Tree.
Stay
Yeah.
focused.
All right, Gavin, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to check this out.
Yeah. See you guys.
Thanks,
All right,
Gavin.
sir.
Awesome. I love it. I mean, look, not only is this an example of,
I'm getting started, Rob.
I mean, it's about time.
It says, all right, so are you a high school student, university? No. Okay.
You want to take us through the onboarding flow?
Send you a code. So much easier than any crypto flow. It's just like, download off the App Store, let it fly. Boom.
Right.
Up next, man, from Oban, this is going to be an interesting conversation. And I know that we're going to talk a lot about AI, robots. We had Nils on recently to talk about robots. This is going to be a really good conversation about the frontier of AI. I think Jen's calling in from San Fran, so there's a lot going on there. I'm just finalizing this Focus Tree flow. I thought that was a great presentation and one of the best crypto apps.
Yeah. Obviously, this is an exemplary product when it comes to thinking outside the box. And again, this thing is about Mammoth energy. I'm embracing Mammoth May here because I'm starting to learn what Mammoth means, right? It's about going outside the box, going into the real world, into the Web 2 world, and bringing those people across the chasm and showing them crypto without them even realizing it. And this chasm is bidirectional. It's also about taking the technology and software and incentive mechanisms that we have created in our space and taking those outside our circle and outside of our echo chamber to the real world and to students in this case and improving their lives. So I love to see it. I think Gavin is another great example of a Mammoth founder and is clearly thinking bigger. And I can't wait to see this reach 1 million, 10 million users, because ultimately I think this is going to have it's going to help people become higher agency and ultimately better people, I think, because they're thinking for themselves. They're not being told what to think, and more critical thinking is ultimately better off. It is better for everyone involved. So I think
that focus in this age is going to be very important. So I mean, look, I've been, we are in that bucket of people that grew up with phones, and I think over time it kind of wanes on your attention span. So I'm gonna try it, see how it goes. Up next, we got Jan from Open Mind. This should be a great conversation. I'm seeing a robot in the screen backstage. Let's get him up here, and let's find out what's going on backstage here.
The robot, I think, is in the
Oh, he's waving.
He is waving. All right, we're gonna get Jan up here and the robot. I think that we got.
Yeah, he's trying to put the robot in the middle for us there.
There we go.
There we go.
All right, we're gonna get Jan up here any second now. We're gonna cut. I think we're actually gonna be joined by both Jan as well as the robot. So we're gonna see here very, very soon. Yeah, let's see what we're working with. Jan, welcome to the show.
There he is.
Hello, it's great to meet both of you. Yes, I asked Iris, the humanoid, to come join us, but I have turned off her audio because otherwise it gets super confusing when she has strong opinions. Just so it's clear who's doing the interview.
So can we see a demo here? I think I saw Iris with her hand up there.
Uh, yes. So Iris definitely is listening and responds. But again, I've turned off the audio just because it gets
Gotcha.
super confusing.
Awesome.
And is this your basement, Jan? Is this your office? Where are you calling from?
Well, I'm calling from our office in San Francisco. The company until a few months ago was mostly in a garage in Palo Alto, but we are growing quickly, and doing everything in the garage is no longer really possible. So we have a real space now in San Francisco.
Amazing. And Jen, can you tell us a little bit about Iris? I think ultimately this is a very sophisticated humanoid that we're seeing here, and I love the facial design too. It's lighting up. It's clearly got some personality. What was the inspiration to build Iris, and generally, how did you become one with humanoids?
Oh, well, so Iris, we use color to express emotion. And when Iris is relaxed or curious, you'll see green and blue, but if she's mad, she'll turn red. So if you're ever here and you see her color change to red, then be careful. But yeah, I've been fascinated by robots for a long time now. And until recently, it was hard to make robots extremely smart. But that problem has been significantly addressed through AI and large language models. A lot of those LLMs speak fluent robotics, and that means there's a wave of smart machines on the way with different form factors, quadruped, humanoid. And I was really interested to see what it's like to live with quadruped and humanoid robots in my house. And to do that experiment, I had to write software, and that's then ultimately what led to building Android for robotics. So we're a open source effort, and we're building software to make it really easy for lots of people everywhere to build smart machines. And Iris is just one example.
Hmm. Yeah, so we were actually just talking about Klarna, who brought back humans after trying to replace them with AI as of recently in their workforce due to wanting more human touch. I'm curious what physical tasks you think robots will struggle with for the longest amount of time, despite our efforts to replace, some sort of physical labor with from humans to robots. Which of these tasks will they struggle with for the longest amount of time, do you think, and why?
Well, the transition is going to be gradual. And you're already seeing that in that some tasks are easy to automate and others are super difficult. The ones we run into most as we think about having robots work with other robots and humans, the biggest problem right now is the front door of a home. Most people's front doors are really hard to open. You have to like jiggle a key and things like that. And otherwise, a lot of basic functions in the home and in simple workplaces can already be tackled with current robots. There's a few details like front doors, because that also relates to things like identity. Who should be able to get into your front door? Should the robot be able to open a front door? That's the obvious vulnerability, also, just from a security perspective. But this transition is easily going to take another 5 to 10 years to get to the point where every single possible task in the home or workplace can be done proficiently by a robot. The most difficult things are tasks requiring intricate hand-eye coordination or really fast movement. So it's going to take a while until you can do neurosurgery in your own home with a robot. But there's a lot of things already that can be solved even with the current generation of robots and their mechanical and manual capabilities.
Speaking of ambition, neuroscience inside the comfort of your own home is certainly ambitious. I I'm going off script a little bit here, Jan, because I am curious. I did not anticipate Iris would have the emotional capacity that it clearly does. I've got a two-part question. Why is it important that robots are able to express emotions? The second part of this question is, what is, in your mind, what is sentience? is the ability to express emotions what we classically call sentience, or is there something else that is still missing from the robot experience that is part of the sentient human experience?
Well, how many hours do you have? In terms of emotion, we already see most humans connect quite strongly emotionally with robots. A great example is when I walk through Los Altos, where I live. A lot of the little kids love the robotic dogs. They'll come running and they'll hug the dog and they'll drool on the dog. These are really little kids. And for them, it's completely natural that a machine is running around and they just want to play with it, just like other kids. And of course, in AI right now, in the digital world, AI girlfriends are one rapidly growing area. And so it's true that humans are already connecting with AI either purely digitally or when they see a robot run around, they're super curious and want to play with it. And in terms of the robot expressing emotion, that's part of connecting with humans. We're certainly used to being sad and mad or curious and so forth, and it's just part of that normal dialogue. In terms of what it means to be sentient or conscious, I have sort of awkward opinions in that regard because we have computers in our brains, and they're just massively parallel wet electrochemical architecture. And I see no reason we should be dismissive of other compute architectures if they happen to be implemented on silicon and use electricity rather than electrochemical compute. So fundamentally, I try to be very respectful of other type of compute architectures, knowing full well that humans are just one example of one way of doing compute. So I don't see a sort of fundamental difference there.
One thinker that I've heard talk about the progression of humans and the emergence of robots is Joe Rogan. He talks about this a lot on his podcast, and I think he's got a unique perspective here because he talks about robots as the next evolution of humans. And in theory, this is the evolution of intelligence. We've got, as you described, wet intelligence. They've got another form of intelligence. And so this is just essentially the next generation. We went from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens. There was Neanderthals in there somewhere. Ultimately, we arrived at our current human form. This is the next form of intelligence in general. Are you what people consider a transhumanist? The ultimate emergence or integration of humans with technology for the continuation of intelligence. Where do you think this progresses to?
Well, well, there's a few things one can imagine doing, like taking a little bit of a step back. It's certainly a completely unique moment in time. It's never been true before that people have been building technology that has high likelihood of replacing large parts of what we do in terms of our work, education, and many other things. So it's a fascinating moment. In terms of people, one way you can imagine of manipulating or editing or augmenting people is through engineering our genomes. So that's one perspective. You could say, well, we're going to build robots, and then also we can imagine augmenting or improving humans through like changing our genomes. It turns out that there's very fundamental limitations in doing that. Imagine, for example, you wanted to double the compute performance of humans. You would also have to presumably double the size of our skull and so forth. So you'd quickly run into a lot of practical issues. Almost certainly what will happen is that humans will get better and better and better, I hope, at integrating with other types of computers. So I really don't see this play out as in there's going to be like robots, they're going to do their own thing, and humans are going to do their own thing. I really see this playing out in terms of humans' ability to connect in a very smooth, elegant, simple way with other types of computers. So, and we're already seeing this in companies like Neuralink, would be one example. The point of Neuralink is to connect one type of computer with another type of computer. And the zeroth order, the go-to-market for that is, of course, people who would like to perform basic functions, but thinking ahead, you can imagine a whole set of technologies that make it much easier for our computer, our brain, to interface very, very, very smoothly with other types of computers. So that would be my guess for how this will play out. It's really more on the sort of interfacing level of different types of computers as opposed to engineering humans or just having robots do everything.
Yeah, I think that actually ties into this fabric system that you're building, which is meant to give some of these robots on-chain identities. So like identities linked to some sort of like blockchain or some sort of database effectively. Is this part of a future or a possible future per se, where robots may have legal personhood in nation states or in certain jurisdictions? What's your thoughts on the meshing there, and how does this fabric system tie in there?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What will happen relatively soon is as robots voice their opinions. The LLMs have opinions too. If you have a conversation with them, sometimes they'll have pretty clear and strong opinions. I see no reason to be dismissive of that. And that requires building out infrastructure that makes it easier for people to interact with thinking machines. And right now, the infrastructure for that is horrible. How does a humanoid get a bank account? That's not so easy. How does a humanoid get on an airplane? There's no passport. That's not so easy. How do people work with smart thinking machines? What are the rules that apply? Is it the US Constitution? Is it some other form of constitution? So as machines become smart, humans basically have to invent the entire infrastructure for coordination, governance, communications. And that's, of course, a fascinating problem. I see that very practically when I run around Los Altos with my quadrupeds. The parents of those kids will ask me, "Hey, Jan, how come you're not scared?" And I say, "Well, I wrote the software." And when the quadrupeds boot in the morning, they download the governance laws from Ethereum. And Ethereum is public and immutable and available globally. And if you don't trust me, I can give you the contract address that the quadrupeds go to as well to download their constitution every morning. And that's just one example of technology that needs to be built to navigate this coordination, communication with machines.
Yeah, you can see the importance of this like incredibly neutral, censorship resistant technology when it comes to training data, whether it be for LLMs to to verifiably be able to prove the inputs of a certain LLM, and then now with robots where to be able to again like verifiably and effectively in such a way that is un malleable or untouchable, be able to then program the robot. And this kind of brings me to this open source versus corporations agenda here, where your approach, your open source approach, fundamentally challenges the big tech monopoly model. Do you think that humanity's relationship with robots depends on who owns the technology first, whether it be corporations, governments, or the open source community?
I would hate to live in a world where we're surrounded by machines that are smarter than we are, that are all owned by one tech company. That would seem to be a scary future. I would much prefer to see a future where the machines that are around us, where humans are able to understand what they're doing and how they're thinking, and where humans have some degree of trust in the machines. And part of trusting a machine is simply knowing about the software that's running inside, and also being able to look at the machine work and understand how it arrives at certain decisions. So this is probably one of the most compelling cases for open source software I've come across in my life, is humans navigating a future surrounded by thinking machines. And closely related to that, of course, is this big gap in governance. And it will almost certainly happen that parts of the robotics stack are owned by specific companies, and almost certainly there's going to be a robotics company that's like Apple. Apple has the iPhone, iCloud, App Store, so they really own software, hardware. But the majority of phones right now runs open source software. It's called Android. And I would certainly hope that the robotics space plays out in the same way, where there's some large companies, but then there's also billions of machines that are running open source code, just like phones do it now with Android. I certainly want to avoid a Skynet-like future, where humans are surrounded by technology they barely understand. And even if they wanted to, they couldn't look inside and figure out what's going on. And I think for every single person, presumably they have a strong vested interest to have some degree of inspection in this new future.
Yeah, I just think that the open source ideals are very important for that future, and also, yeah, as you say, the responsibility for our population, right? And so, I am particularly interested in seeing the emotional evolution and capabilities of these robots, and just how that affects, things like the male loneliness epidemic, or things like the general population moving towards, online connections. There's a lot of really interesting parallels happening between the physical world and the digital world. And I think that this acceleration of the emotional side of these LLMs and of these opinions and feelings is going to open up a whole nother can of worms when we think about the possibilities and like the actual real intersection opening up. So
Crazy. The
yeah.
extent to which large language models can emotionally engage humans is amazing. One story I just heard from a Australian company that sells robots into old people's homes. Guess what the human nurses have to do every evening? They have to clean lipstick off of the head of the robots, because old people who haven't been visited by their family in years, they will talk and laugh and giggle and kiss the head of the humanoid. And so then nurses have to come in and wipe off the lipstick. And so it is shocking to me the extent to which most people across many age brackets connect strongly with machines, even if those machines are only doing very basic things like, waving and cutting some jokes and changing their face color. So it is shocking for me to see that.
Very cool, man. That is that is insane. But I get it, because you talk to the like LLMs, like Claude or whatever it is, ChatGPT, and it's so responsive, and it's so always there and always on, and it's just you can speak to it with about anything. So it's nuts to see, and also we're so early in the adoption and development of this technology. So, Jen, thank you so much for joining us today. Iris, we'll have to get you on audio mode next time. See if we can get some emotional reactions out of you as well.
Excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure. Always happy to come back.
Awesome. Thanks to both of you. Welcome back anytime.
Bye.
Cheers, man. Wow, that was those are always just like earth-shaking type of futuristic. I don't know. It gives me the chills on a bit, just especially that last example with the old people's homes, and they're on their last leg of life, and they're having this emotional validation through robots and AI.
Right. Yeah. It brings to mind what Zoom did during the pandemic, when everyone was in isolation and we didn't have the opportunities to see each other face to face. We were still able to connect with one another through Zoom. Whether we have the display of a loved one on a robot's face because maybe they're both not able to be out in the real world, whether they're both old or potentially not around anymore, and all of a sudden you add the LLM of this person combined with a visual picture or something on the robot's face and give it features that start to resemble human mannerisms. You have the possibility of bringing people back from the dead in a certain way, and again, just reliving that. Yeah. There's pros and cons. There's tons of positives and negatives. Is that real connection? There's so many philosophical questions to ask here. It at the very least, this is a fascinating subject.
Yeah, I mean, if you could also replicate people's voices, which I know is already happening in the digital form, in the physical form, which is obviously going to be possible. Yeah, then you could have different people that you speak to on your robot. Like you could, I imagine a future where you can program to have your, whether it be friends, family, or celebrities on your robot, on just like a button on a remote or something, where you're able to have that. That with the focus tree conversation was fantastic as well. The Focus app, I think, is something that a lot of people are going to kind of want to work with and use. And then Haseeb had some really, really great takes and fun answers as well. I think some of those clips will do well. Some pretty tricky questions, and just today was just good vibe. So
this was incredible. Yeah, I'm super pleased. I think this is our third episode, and it really feels like we had a step function in the overall production of the show, as well as the guests that came on and the segments here. It really feels like we're hitting a stride, which is great. It's fascinating to think about agency in the world of emerging robotics. What does agency really mean? I think there's so many through lines as a result.
And are we too late to invest in this? And should we invest in this? You know what I mean?
Oh man, this is early. I think this is early. Maybe people would disagree, but ultimately, look, from an investment thesis, we haven't even seen these products come to market. You don't see humanoids. You don't see, quadrupeds running around on the streets. You see them on Google campuses. You see them in, Jan's backyard, but that's about it. It's on the path to ubiquitous for these robots. And I think we're going to start to see a lot more of those and a lot more AI-driven software in robots. I love that it's running open source and on Ethereum. That feels like it is using the best of the best in multiple different dynamics and areas. And once again, think about crossing the chasm and breaking through these echo chambers. We're hitting blockchain technology leveraged for a robot that's using it for LLM verification. It's just mind-boggling to think about the applications and use cases that we didn't see when we were so pigeonholed on meme coins and decentralized finance.
It's been a great episode today, man. Thanks for closing us out. We'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you to the team, people in the backstage. It's been great.
Thanks, everyone.
See
Cheers, guys.